You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
What if the killer you've been running from was you all along? Lauren thought she was being hunted. The chilling diary she found, filled with vivid confessions of brutal murders, was supposed to lead her to a monster lurking in the shadows. Every page she turned, every name she searched, pulled her deeper into a nightmare she couldn't escape. Anonymous messages, a masked figure watching her, a truth too horrifying to believe. But the real terror wasn't out there. It was inside her. As memories unravel and reality twists, Lauren comes face to face with the darkest revelation of all. She's not the victim in this story. She's the one who wrote it. Welcome to the Diary of a Killer, where the lines between sanity and madness blur and the final entry is waiting to be written. Subscribe now for more mind-bending psychological thrillers and chilling horror stories. Chapter 1. The Desk. Lauren had never intended to go to the estate sale. She had been driving home when she saw the crooked sign, "Estate Sale, Everything Must Go," propped up at the edge of a cracked driveway. Something about it pulled at her, an unshakable curiosity that whispered, "Just take a look." The house loomed ahead, a relic of another time, its weather-worn bricks and sagging shutters holding secrets within. The moment she stepped inside, she felt it, something thick in the air, something unseen. The smell of dust, aged wood, and something faintly metallic clung to the walls. Lauren wandered through the house, her fingers grazing forgotten relics, a porcelain doll missing an eye, a rusted pocket watch, stacks of yellowed newspapers. Then she saw it, a desk. Dark mahogany, sturdy, carved edges worn from years of use. It was beautiful, but more than that, it felt significant. "I'll take it," she told the man running the sale, a gaunt, tired-looking relative of the deceased. The man hesitated. "That one?" His eyes flickered to the desk, then back to her. Lauren nodded. His fingers tightened around the receipt book. "Be careful with it," he murmured, his tone almost regretful. She should have listened. That night, Lauren dragged the desk into her apartment, wiping a layer of dust from its surface. It was perfect. A real antique, solid and heavy, not like the flimsy furniture she was used to. As she pulled open the drawers, something shifted. A click, a hidden compartment. Her heart pounded as she pried it open, her fingers brushing against something soft. A leather-bound book. The cover was worn, the spine cracked, its pages curled at the edges. A deep, unsettling chill settled in her bones as she turned to the first page. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. "Today I killed for the first time. It was easier than I expected, but now I want to feel it again." Lauren's stomach twisted. A prank? Someone's twisted attempt at writing fiction? She flipped through the pages, her breath coming in short bursts. Names, dates, descriptions of pain, fear, and death. The words slithered off the page, too real, too precise. Lauren grabbed her phone and searched one of the names. A real person. A real, unsolved murder. Her hands shook as she searched another. And another. Every name, every date, every death. Real. Her pulse pounded as she reached the final page. It was mostly blank, except for one sentence. "She will be next." Beneath it, her own name. Lauren's breath came in shallow gasps. This had to be a mistake, a trick, something not real. But then, a creak from the hallway. She lived alone. Another sound, closer this time. Lauren's hands tightened around the book as the air grew heavy, pressing against her. Slowly, she reached for her phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The call rang once, then cut to static. The lights flickered. And then, a whisper. Not from the book, not from her mind, from the darkness beyond the door. "I knew you'd find it." The room plunged into blackness. Lauren barely had time to scream. Chapter 2. The whisper in the dark darkness swallowed Lauren's apartment. The air turned thick, suffocating, pressing against her chest like an unseen weight. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her pulse a wild hammer against her ribs. The whisper still lingered in the air, curling around her like smoke. I knew you'd find it. Lauren's grip on the leather-bound diary tightened, her knuckles white. She forced herself to move, scrambling for her phone. Her fingers fumbled in the dark, pressing the screen. Nothing. No light. No signal. The silence stretched, unnatural, humming with something unseen. Then a slow, deliberate creak. Footsteps. Not from inside her apartment, from just outside her door. Lauren's breath hitched. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, to hide, but her legs were frozen, her body locked in place by sheer primal terror. Another step. Someone was out there. She wasn't alone. The seconds stretched, each one a lifetime. Lauren clenched her teeth, forcing herself to move. She reached blindly for the desk, feeling for anything to use as a weapon. Her fingers closed around a pair of scissors. The sound outside stopped. The silence was worse. Lauren's breath came in sharp, uneven bursts. She edged toward the door, pressing her ear against the wood. Nothing. Had she imagined it? Had the fear twisted her senses, made her hallucinate? A shuffling noise, low and deliberate, like someone shifting their weight just beyond the doorframe. Then, a click. The doorknob, turning. Lauren's body reacted before her mind could. She lunged backward, nearly tripping over the desk as she clutched the scissors like a lifeline. The door didn't open. It just stopped moving. Another silence. And then something slid under the door. A piece of paper. Lauren's eyes locked onto it. A small folded square, perfectly creased. For a moment she didn't move. Then with shaking fingers she knelt and picked it up, unfolded it. A single sentence was scrawled in the same precise, careful handwriting as the diary. "You're not supposed to know." Lauren's stomach twisted into a knot. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She turned back to the door, dread pooling in her veins. The shadow beneath it was gone. Whoever had been standing there had vanished. Lauren spent the rest of the night awake, every light in the apartment turned on, the diary clutched in her hands like a cursed object she couldn't put down. She needed to go to the police. She needed to tell someone. But what would she even say? She had bought a desk, found a diary of a serial killer. And now someone, maybe the killer themselves, knew she had it. No one would believe her. Unless, Lauren's gaze flickered back to the diary, she needed proof. The dates in the book, she had already matched them to real crimes. But there had to be something more. Something in these pages that no one else knew. A name, a detail. Something that could catch a killer. Or something that could make her the next victim. Either way, she had no choice. Lauren turned the page and started reading. Chapter 3. A Name in Blood. The hours bled into morning. Lauren sat hunched over the desk, the diary spread open before her. The dim glow of a single lamp cast long, trembling shadows across the pages. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, but she didn't dare close them. Not after what had happened. Not with the words from that note still seared into her mind. You're not supposed to know. Someone had been at her door. Someone had watched her. And they were still out there. Her fingers hovered over the aged paper, heart pounding as she flipped another page. More entries, more murders, each one written with the same chilling precision, every victim described in painful, intimate detail, the way they had begged, the final moments before their lives were snuffed out, the satisfaction in the killer's words. But there had to be something deeper here, a thread, a connection. Lauren grabbed her laptop, her fingers flying over the keys. She cross-referenced every date, every location, tracing them back to old articles, archived police reports. Most were cold cases. But then, one of them wasn't. Lauren's breath hitched. The most recent entry, the last murder recorded in the diary. It had happened just 6 months ago, and the case was still open. Her pulse thundered as she clicked the article. Missing woman found, murdered in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. No suspect identified. No known connections to the crime. Lauren turned back to the diary, scanning the entry again. She was a fighter. Scratched me. I let her think she had a chance before I took it away. That look in her eyes. Priceless. Lauren's hands tightened into fists. If this was real, if the killer had actually written this, it meant there could be something the police missed. Something hidden in these pages that could prove this was more than just a horrifying journal. A name. A real name. Her eyes darted across the text, searching for anything that might identify the writer. Nothing. No signature. No initials. No clues to their identity. Lauren swallowed hard, gripping the diary tighter, and then she saw it. At the very bottom of the page, barely visible, was a single drop of dried blood. Her stomach twisted. Was it from the victim, the killer, a warning? Before she could process it, her phone buzzed. The sound made her jump so violently she nearly knocked over her lamp. The screen lit up. Unknown number. Lauren hesitated. Her hand shook as she reached for the phone. The call went to voicemail. A second later, a text popped up. No name, no contact info, just 5 words. Stop reading or you're next. Lauren's heart slammed against her ribs. Her mouth went dry. Someone was watching her. She shot up from the chair, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Her apartment was silent, too silent. She moved toward the window, peering through the blinds. The street below was empty, but then a dark figure, standing at the edge of the sidewalk, motionless, watching. Lauren's stomach turned to ice. She yanked the blinds shut, pressing a hand over her mouth to keep from gasping too loud. This wasn't just some sick game. This was real, and if she didn't do something soon, she wouldn't live to see how it ended. Chapter 4. The Figure in the Dark. Lauren stood frozen, heart pounding, her breath shallow and uneven. The figure on the sidewalk hadn't moved. It stood perfectly still, silhouetted against the dim glow of a street lamp, shrouded in darkness. Watching. She couldn't see a face. No defining features, just a presence, a looming unnerving thing that shouldn't have been there. Her fingers clenched around her phone. She needed to call someone, anyone. She unlocked the screen, ready to dial 911. Another text popped up. I see you. Her blood turned to ice. Lauren backed away from the window, the diary still clutched in her other hand. The apartment walls suddenly felt too thin, the locks on her doors too weak. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't her mind playing tricks. Someone was out there, and they knew she had the diary. She took a slow, careful step backward, toward her bedroom, toward her closet, toward something she could hide behind if she had to. The text wasn't enough. She needed proof. Swallowing hard, she inched toward the blinds again and peeked through the narrow gap. The figure was gone. The sidewalk was empty. Lauren's stomach twisted. The pounding of her heart filled the silence, every second dragging like an eternity. She scanned the street, the shadows, the alley across from her building. Nothing. No sign of them. Had they left, or were they closer? The thought made her skin crawl. Her mind screamed at her to leave, to grab her keys, to get the hell out of there. But she couldn't. Not without answers. She turned back to the diary, flipping through the pages faster now, searching for anything that could tell her who this person was, who had written these words, who had left this behind. Somewhere near the middle of the book, something caught her eye. A passage different from the others. Short, almost personal. It won't be long before someone finds this. Maybe sooner than I'd like, but it doesn't matter. Even if they know, it won't change anything. They won't stop me. Lauren's hands trembled. The words weren't about a murder. They were about the diary itself. Like the killer had known, expected that someone would eventually find it. And now, had they been waiting? Was she exactly where they wanted her to be? A cold shiver ran through her. A knock at the door made her flinch so violently she nearly dropped the book. It wasn't loud, not forceful, a soft, measured knock, knock, knock. Like whoever was on the other side knew she was afraid. Lauren's breath caught in her throat. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The knock came again. Her shaking hand reached for the scissors still sitting on the desk. She forced herself toward the door, each step slow, deliberate. She pressed an eye against the peephole. No one was there. But something was. A slip of paper. Someone had slid it under her door. Her knees nearly gave out as she knelt to pick it up. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. One single line, written in the same sharp, deliberate handwriting as the diary. "You're running out of time." A choked sound escaped her lips. She bolted upright, scrambling backward, heart hammering against her ribs. And then, her phone buzzed. Another text. Unknown number. Lauren. They knew her name. Her vision blurred. The walls of her apartment felt like they were closing in. Her hands tightened around the diary. There was only one thing left to do. Find out who the killer was before they found her. Chapter 5. The hunt begins. Lauren sat on the floor, her back pressed against the wall, heart racing. Her hands shook as she stared at the note. "You're running out of time." Her phone buzzed again. She flinched. the glow from the screen burning into her retinas like an accusation. Unknown number. She didn't want to look, didn't want to know what came next, but she had no choice. Her trembling fingers unlocked the phone. You shouldn't have opened it. Lauren sucked in a sharp breath. She didn't reply. Couldn't. Instead, she forced herself to move, to fight against the sheer terror coursing through her. She grabbed her laptop and opened another search tab. The diary had names, locations, dates. If she could find a pattern, if she could trace them back to a single person, a single place, maybe she could figure out who the killer was before they got to her. Her fingers flew over the keys, her breath shallow and uneven. She started with the most recent victim, the woman murdered 6 months ago. She had to be the key. Lauren cross-referenced everything, the crime scene, the news reports, police statements, missing person reports, and then she saw it. A name buried deep in an old forum post, barely mentioned in the original news articles. Daniel Voss. Her stomach clenched. She read further. Daniel Voss had been a suspect, but never arrested. A former journalist who had once written about the case before he seemingly vanished. But there was something off about it. The posts described him as obsessed with the murders. Too obsessed. Lauren's fingers trembled as she typed his name into the search bar. Nothing recent. No social media. No address. Like he had disappeared or like he had been hiding. Her skin prickled. Was this it? Had she found the killer? Her phone vibrated again. Lauren didn't want to look, but she did. Stop looking for me. Her breath hitched, her vision swam. Whoever was on the other end, they knew exactly what she was doing, and they were watching her. Lauren moved on autopilot, shoving the diary into her bag, grabbing her keys. She needed to get out, to go somewhere safe. As she opened the door, she froze. A single envelope lay at her feet, unmarked. She bent down slowly, dread curling in her stomach. She peeled back the flap and slid out the contents. A photo of her, taken from outside her apartment window. Her breath hitched, nausea curling in her gut. Lauren's hands trembled as she flipped it over. More handwriting. The same deliberate, methodical scrawl as the diary. Too late. Her pulse roared in her ears. A sharp sound, a creak, came from the hallway. Lauren's head snapped up. She wasn't alone. Chapter 6. The Intruder. Lauren's breath turned shallow, her pulse hammering in her ears. A single sound. A creak from the hallway. Someone was inside. She clenched the photo in one hand, the diary in the other, forcing herself to move. Slow. Silent. Her apartment wasn't big, there weren't many places to hide, but they had the advantage. Lauren had left her door unlocked. Her stomach twisted. She reached for the scissors she had left on the desk, gripping them so tight her knuckles turned white. Another sound. This time closer, a whisper of movement, a breath that wasn't hers. Lauren edged toward her bedroom, her back pressed against the wall. If she could get to the fire escape, a shadow moved past the doorway. Her heart stopped. A tall, silent figure, not rushing, not panicked. They were taking their time. Lauren's grip on the scissors tightened. Her phone vibrated. The sound cut through the silence like a gunshot. The figure froze. Lauren didn't think. She ran, straight through the doorway into the dark. A hand lashed out at her. She ducked, a sharp breath from the intruder, surprised. Lauren swung the scissors blindly. Contact. A hiss of pain. She felt the blade sink into flesh. But she didn't stop. She barreled forward, slamming into the figure, shoving them back. For one brief second, the intruder stumbled. It was all she needed. Lauren ran for the door, yanked it open and bolted. She didn't stop running until she reached the street. The air was cold, sharp against her burning lungs. Her hands shook violently as she pulled out her phone. She dialed 911. The call rang once, twice. A voice picked up. But it wasn't the operator. It was them. You shouldn't have done that. A sharp click. The line went dead. Lauren stared at the screen, her fingers numb. Her call had been intercepted. This wasn't just some stalker. Whoever was after her, they were connected. They had power, and they weren't going to stop. She turned in circles, scanning the empty street, expecting to see them, expecting to hear that whisper again, that voice from the dark. But the street was empty. For now. She clutched the diary against her chest, sucking in a shaky breath. She had one option left. Find Daniel Voss, because if she didn't, she was going to end up as the next entry in that diary. Chapter 7. The Last Suspect. Lauren didn't stop running until she reached her car. Her breath came in sharp gasps as she yanked open the door, threw herself inside and locked it. Her fingers trembled as she jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, a welcome sound in the crushing silence of the night. She had one destination. Daniel Voss. The last suspect, the only name in this nightmare that might give her answers. She pulled up his last known address, an old apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. Lauren's foot slammed on the gas. She didn't care about red lights, didn't care about the way her hands shook against the wheel. She just needed to find him before it was too late. The apartment complex was a wreck. Peeling paint, rusted metal staircases, the kind of place where people kept their heads down and didn't ask questions. Lauren parked across the street, her pulse still erratic as she killed the engine. The night felt too still. The weight of the diary pressed against her chest. She forced herself to move, stepping onto the cracked pavement. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to turn around. But she didn't, because if Daniel Voss had the answers she needed, she had no other choice. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, counting the doors. 4B. She reached it. Knocked. No answer. She knocked again. Harder. Still nothing. Lauren swallowed. She reached for the doorknob, and it turned. Unlocked. The door creaked open an inch. A sharp wave of dread rolled through her. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she pushed the door open all the way. The smell hit her first. Rot. Like something had been sitting too long. Lauren's stomach twisted. She reached into her bag, gripping the scissors she had stolen from her desk. The apartment was dark, too quiet, the air thick with something she didn't want to name. Daniel? Her voice was barely a whisper. No answer. She stepped inside. The floor creaked beneath her weight. Something dripped in the distance. Lauren's breath hitched, then the glow of a laptop screen. Still on, still running. Lauren edged toward it. The chair in front of the desk was empty. She leaned forward. An open document glowed on the screen. Words, a journal entry, a fresh one. She started to read. She's coming. I knew she would. They said she wouldn't get this far, but I told them she would. She's seen too much. She's read too much. It's too late for her now. Lauren's heart stopped. This wasn't some old entry. This was written about her, right now. The realization sent a jolt of terror through her. She spun around and nearly screamed, because someone was standing in the doorway, watching, waiting. Chapter 8. Face to face. The figure in the doorway didn't move. Lauren's breath came in short, sharp bursts, her body frozen in place. The glow from the laptop screen barely illuminated the man standing in front of her. Daniel Voss. He looked worn. Hollowed-out eyes. Clothes wrinkled like he hadn't left this apartment in weeks. Maybe months. But his expression, it wasn't surprised. It wasn't confused. It was expectant. Like he had been waiting for her. Lauren's grip tightened around the scissors in her pocket. Daniel? Her voice barely worked. He didn't blink. You shouldn't be here. Lauren swallowed, stepping backward. The chair pressed against her legs, but she refused to sit. Her mind raced. I read the diary. A flicker of something crossed his face. Not fear, not anger. Resignation. I know, he said. Lauren's stomach twisted. Then tell me the truth, she whispered. Daniel let out a slow breath, stepping further into the room. The door clicked shut behind him. Lauren's pulse spiked. You think I wrote it? His voice was eerily calm. Her fingers curled tighter around the scissors. I don't know what to think, she admitted, but someone does. Daniel let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. You have no idea what you've walked into. Lauren's skin prickled. You were a suspect, she pushed, in the last murder, but you disappeared. His jaw tensed, because I knew they were coming for me. Lauren's breath hitched. They? Daniel's eyes locked onto hers, cold, steady. The people who left that diary behind. Lauren's stomach dropped. Her grip on the scissors faltered. What? Daniel took another step closer. I didn't write it. Silence rang between them. Lauren's mind spun. The pages, the murders, the threats. If he wasn't the killer, then who? Her thoughts snapped as Daniel leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper. They already know you have it. Lauren's blood ran cold. She staggered back. Then who? A thump outside the apartment. Lauren and Daniel both froze. A slow, deliberate footstep. Then another. A shadow shifted beneath the door. Lauren's entire body turned to ice. Daniel didn't look surprised. Instead, his jaw clenched. They're here, he muttered. Lauren's pulse roared in her ears, a whisper muffled through the door. She should have left it alone. The doorknob began to turn. Chapter 9. Shadows at the door. The apartment felt like a trap. A single flickering bulb in the ceiling cast warped shadows against the peeling wallpaper. Dust clung to the stale air, thick and suffocating. The faint hum of an old refrigerator buzzed in the silence, too loud, too sharp. Lauren could hear her own breath, and outside the door, a whisper. "Too late, Lauren." The sound wasn't loud, it was almost gentle, which made it so much worse. Her entire body locked up. Daniel moved first. With a single lunge, he slammed the deadbolt shut just as the doorknob turned fully. Lauren's pulse hammered. A moment of silence. Then, bam! The door shuddered in its frame. A pause. Harder this time. The wood splintered. Lauren backed away, forcing her legs to move, forcing herself to breathe. Daniel turned toward her, voice low and urgent. "We have to go, now." He yanked open a closet door. Inside, a fire escape. A rush of cold night air swept into the room, mixing with the thick, stale scent of the apartment. Daniel climbed through first, grabbing the rusted metal railing. Lauren took a step forward and froze. The door burst open. A figure stepped inside. Lauren's stomach dropped. They were tall, silent, dressed in black. A mask concealed their face, smooth and empty, a hollow void where their features should have been. Lauren couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The figure didn't lunge, didn't chase. They just stood there like they were waiting, and then they raised a hand. A small glowing screen reflected against the darkness. Lauren's pulse stopped. Her phone, her mind spun. She had been holding it, hadn't she? Her fingers tightened around empty air. No, she hadn't. Somewhere between the fire escape and Daniel pulling her forward, she had dropped it. And now, they had it. The screen lit up. A new text appeared. "Unknown number. You can't run from us." A cold rush of nausea rolled through her. The masked figure tilted their head, like they were amused, like they'd been waiting for this moment. Lauren's body finally reacted. She lunged for the fire escape, gripping Daniel's outstretched hand. He yanked her down fast. Metal groaned beneath their weight. Above them, the masked figure stepped onto the landing, still not chasing, still just watching, holding her phone. Lauren hit the pavement running, Daniel dragging her forward. Wind howled through the alley, carrying the echoes of the past, the names in the diary, the voices in the dark, the warning she had ignored. She didn't look back. She couldn't, because she knew. If she did, they would still be there, waiting. And next time, she wouldn't get away. Chapter 10. No way out. The alley stretched ahead, a narrow throat of darkness lined with crumbling brick walls and overflowing dumpsters. The air smelled of mildew and rot, a sharp contrast to the icy wind slicing through the night. Lauren's breath came in ragged gasps as she sprinted alongside Daniel, their footsteps pounding against the pavement. She risked a glance over her shoulder. The figure was gone. The fire escape stood empty. No movement, no sound. But that didn't mean they weren't still watching. Daniel grabbed her wrist. "Come on, we need to disappear." Disappear. Like Daniel had, like all the victims in the diary. Lauren's stomach twisted, but she didn't argue. They turned a corner, emerging onto a dimly lit side street. A single street lamp flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows against the concrete. Daniel pulled her toward an abandoned gas station, a hiding spot, or a trap. Lauren hesitated, her instincts screaming. Trust him? Or run? But she had no other options. She followed him inside. The gas station had been abandoned for years. Dust coated the broken shelves. A shattered security mirror hung above the counter, fractured into 100 distorted reflections. Daniel pulled her toward the back, past a rusted refrigerator humming faintly despite its emptiness. "We can't stay long," he muttered. "They know every move we make." Lauren's heart slammed against her ribs. "They? Who are they?" She whispered. Daniel hesitated. Then he turned to her, his expression unreadable. "They're not just one person." His voice was barely above a whisper. "They're everywhere." Lauren shook her head, struggling to make sense of it. "But the diary was left behind on purpose." Daniel's jaw clenched. They wanted someone to find it. Lauren's breath caught. "Why?" A sound, a footstep, outside. Both of them froze. The wind howled through the cracked windows, rattling the old metal shelves. Then, a shadow passed by the front door, slow, deliberate. Lauren's blood turned to ice. Daniel grabbed her arm. "There's a back exit," he whispered. "Stay quiet." They moved carefully, step by step, through the ruined aisles. Every breath felt too loud. Every creak of the floor sent a fresh spike of fear through Lauren's chest. They reached the back door. Daniel pushed it open. It didn't budge. His expression darkened. He tried again. Nothing. It was locked. From the outside, Lauren's hands went clammy. A sick feeling coiled in her stomach. They were trapped. And then the front door creaked open. A gust of wind sent dust swirling into the air. A slow, measured footstep. Lauren turned to Daniel, eyes wide. His grip tightened around her wrist. He didn't have to say it. They weren't getting out of here, not unless they fought their way out. And even then, would it be enough? The figure stepped further inside. The door swung shut behind them, locking out the night, locking them in. The shadows shifted, and then came the whisper. "It's over, Lauren." Chapter 11, the final entry. "It's over, Lauren." The words slithered through the dark, cold and certain. The gas station air felt thicker, like the walls were closing in. Daniel's breathing slowed, muscles coiled like a spring. Lauren felt her own heart pounding against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against the eerie stillness of the room. The figure took another step inside. Then they tossed something onto the floor. Lauren's phone. She hesitated before bending down and picking it up. The screen was still unlocked. A document was open. A new entry. A fresh entry. Her stomach twisted as she read it. She ran. She fought. She thought she had a choice, but she never did. This was always meant to happen. The story ends with her. Lauren's hands trembled, her lips parted, but no sound came out. Daniel took a step closer to her, voice low. "Lauren, what does it say?" She couldn't answer. She couldn't breathe. Her mind spun, past memories bleeding into the present. The diary, the familiar handwriting, the way each entry felt personal. Too real, too vivid, like she wasn't just reading the killer's thoughts, like she was reliving them. A chill crawled up her spine. She looked up, staring at the figure, the mask, the stillness. Something inside her clicked. Lauren's voice came out as a whisper. "Who wrote the diary?" The figure finally moved, slow, deliberate, and then they took off the mask. Lauren's lungs locked. She was staring at herself, her own face, her own hollow eyes. No, that wasn't possible, was it? The memories slammed into her at once, fragments of things she had never questioned. The way she had felt drawn to the desk at the estate sale, the way she had instinctively recognized the places described in the diary, the way the words felt like her own. No, this wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Lauren stumbled backward, her pulse a violent drumbeat. Daniel's voice cut through the suffocating air. "Lauren, what the hell is going on?" The other her just smiled. The kind of smile that felt wrong, the kind of smile that meant this was already over. And then the lights cut out. Total darkness, a whisper close to her ear. "You finally remember, don't you?" Lauren opened her mouth to scream, but the sound never came. Chapter 12, the shadow in the dark. The gas station was silent. The air hung thick and stale, the scent of dust and oil clinging to every surface. A single flickering bulb buzzed overhead, casting erratic, shaking shadows along the cracked tile floor. Lauren stood near the rusted refrigerators, barely breathing. She could feel it now. The weight of the truth pressing against her skull, her mind splintering as memories unraveled. Everything she had thought was real. The figure at her door, the masked stalker, the diary left behind as a sinister warning. It was all a lie. A sickness that had been lurking, waiting, buried deep in her mind. She had been running. Not from someone else, not from a killer in the shadows. She had been running from herself. And now, there was nowhere left to go. Lauren let out a shaky breath, her fingers tightening around the scissors hidden in her jacket pocket. She turned toward Daniel. He was watching her, really watching her now. His face was tight with something she didn't quite recognize at first, but then she saw it. Fear, not of the situation, not of some unseen enemy, of her. Lauren's lips twitched, because now she understood. Daniel had been part of this all along, not as an accomplice, not as an ally, but as the prime suspect. She had found him when she dug into the murders. When she cross-referenced every name in the diary, every detail of her past life, his name kept appearing. Daniel Voss, the journalist obsessed with the killings, the man who had been questioned but never arrested, the one who had disappeared when the police started to look too closely. She had known him before. She was sure of it now, not from a news article, not from an investigation, from something deeper, something she couldn't quite grasp. The memory was just out of reach. like a whisper curling at the edges of her mind, like a dream she was just waking up from. Daniel swallowed hard, stepping back toward the door. His voice was careful, measured. "Lauren, listen to me." She tilted her head. Why did he sound so worried? Like she was the one in danger, like she wasn't the one being hunted. Unless a new thought struck her, something dark, something inevitable. What if Daniel had never been a suspect? What if Daniel had been the one watching her all along? What if this was a trap? She felt her pulse quicken, her skin humming with a familiar thrill. She took a slow step forward. Daniel flinched. That was all the confirmation she needed. She let out a breathless laugh. "You're afraid of me." Daniel's expression didn't change. "Lauren, put the scissors down." Her fingers clenched tighter around the handle. The blade felt right in her hand, like she had held it before, like it was meant to be there. A flicker of movement caught her eye, the reflection in the broken mirror behind Daniel. Her own twisted silhouette. The shadow that had been following them, the dark figure that had chased them through the city, haunted her every step, always just behind her. It had always been her. Lauren let out a breath. It all made sense now. The people watching, the masked figure at her door, the messages. There had never been anyone else. There had never been a group, a society of killers hunting her down. It was all in her head. The delusions had been creeping back, crawling under her skin since she found the diary. The moment she read the first entry, the walls had begun to crumble. Her past had resurfaced, and she had become her own stalker. She had been chasing herself. Daniel took another step back, voice low and careful. "Lauren, you need help." She smiled, soft, slow. "I already have everything I need." Then she lunged. The scissors sliced through the air. Daniel barely had time to react before the blade plunged into his stomach. His breath hitched. He staggered, fingers grasping at the wound as warm blood bloomed across his shirt. For a second, he didn't believe it, didn't understand it. Lauren twisted the blade. A gasp tore from his throat. He collapsed to his knees, his hands smeared red. Lauren crouched in front of him, tilting her head, studying him. His eyes were wide, confused. "Why?" He choked out. Lauren smiled. "Because I remember now." She watched as his body went still. The blood pooling beneath him was almost artistic. It felt familiar, like a life she had lived before, like muscle memory. She had been running for so long, so desperate to outrun the truth. But now she had embraced it. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't being hunted. She was the hunter. And the story wasn't over. Not yet. She wiped the blade against Daniel's shirt, then reached into her pocket. She pulled out the diary, her diary. The next page was blank, waiting. Lauren took the pen from her bag and pressed the tip to the paper. Her handwriting was careful, precise. "Tonight, I killed again. It was easier than I expected, but now I want to feel it again." She clicked the pen shut. Then she stood. The gas station was quiet, dark. A single street lamp flickered outside, illuminating the trail of footprints she would leave behind. Lauren tucked the diary back into her coat. Then, without looking back, she stepped out into the night. A new hunt had already begun. Final entry. The shadow was always me. She thought she was the prey, but the truth was far darker. The shadow she feared was never behind her. It was inside her all along. And now the hunt begins again.
Every story has an end, but here the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.